I did not begin this journey because I was strong. I began it because I was empty. There was a quiet place inside me that no success could reach, no noise could fill, and no effort could heal. I had learned how to function, how to smile, how to keep moving, but I had not learned how to be still. And it was in that stillness, or rather the lack of it, that I realized something was missing. So I made a simple decision. Not a dramatic vow, not a public declaration, just a quiet surrender. I told God, for the next 7 days, I will change how I live, not outwardly, but inwardly. I did not know that those 7 days would change everything. The first habit was silence. True silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. I woke up earlier than usual and sat alone with no music, no phone, no words. At first my thoughts screamed, my worries demanded attention, but slowly something gentle began to settle over my heart. I realized how rarely I had allowed God to speak without interruption. Silence became sacred. It softened me. It made me aware that God does not shout, He whispers. The second habit was surrender, real surrender, not the kind spoken casually but practiced deliberately. Each morning, I released my plans, my expectations, my need to control outcomes. I placed my will down and said, not what I want, but what you desire. That was not easy. My pride resisted, my fear argued, but every time I surrendered, peace replaced anxiety. I discovered that control had never protected me. Surrender did. The third habit was gratitude, spoken aloud, not for perfect circumstances, but for God's presence in imperfect ones. I thanked Him for small things, breath, light, strength to endure, grace to continue. Gratitude shifted my focus. I stopped looking for what was missing and began recognizing what had always been there. God had not changed. My awareness had. The fourth habit was guarding my thoughts. I became intentional about what I allowed to remain in my mind. When fear entered, I did not entertain it. When doubt whispered, I answered it with truth. I realized that transformation does not begin in actions, it begins in thought. As my thoughts changed, my reactions changed. As my reactions changed, my life followed. The fifth habit was obedience in small things. Not dramatic acts, but quiet obedience. Speaking kindly when it was difficult. Choosing patience when irritation rose. Forgiving quickly. Trusting immediately. I learned that God often measures faithfulness not by what we do publicly, but by how we respond privately. By the end of the 7th day, my circumstances looked the same, but I was not the same. My heart was lighter. My spirit was calmer. My awareness of God was sharper. I had not changed my life by striving harder. I had changed it by yielding deeper. I learned something precious in those 7 days. Transformation is not the result of effort alone, but of alignment. When the soul aligns with God, everything begins to fall into order. Peace replaces pressure, clarity replaces confusion, strength flows without striving. And I understood this truth: God is not distant. He is waiting, waiting for silence, waiting for surrender, waiting for gratitude, waiting for obedience, waiting for a heart that says, I am willing. Those 7 days did not end a journey, they began one. Because when God is given room to move, even 1 week can change a lifetime. Silence is not emptiness, it is an invitation. It is the moment when the noise of the world loosens its grip and the soul finally exhales. Most lives are filled with constant motion, constant sound, constant demand, and in that condition, the heart becomes crowded. Thoughts overlap, worries compete, and attention is scattered. In such a space, it becomes difficult to recognize the gentle nearness of God. Silence does not force His presence, it reveals it. When everything else steps back, what remains becomes clear. At first, silence can feel uncomfortable. The mind resists it because it exposes what has been hidden beneath activity. Unfinished fears surface, old memories whisper, the urge to distract oneself becomes strong. Yet this resistance is not a sign of failure, it is evidence that silence is working. When the soul is no longer entertained, it begins to speak honestly. Silence pulls away the coverings, and brings the heart into truth, where healing begins quietly, without spectacle. In silence, listening replaces speaking. Prayer changes its posture. Instead of presenting a list of requests, the heart waits. Waiting is not passive, it is expectant. It is the decision to trust that God speaks in ways that are often missed when the mind is rushing. Silence trains the spirit to recognize subtle movements, gentle impressions, and inward guidance that cannot be heard over constant noise. The more silence is practiced, the clearer discernment becomes. Silence also dismantles self-dependence. When external input is removed, the soul becomes aware of how much it relies on voices other than God's. Opinions, fears, news, and internal dialogue all compete for authority. Silence strips these influences of their power and restores proper alignment. In that alignment, the heart remembers where its true security rests, not in answers, but in presence. There is a deep humility formed in silence. It acknowledges that not every moment requires explanation or control. It allows mystery to exist without anxiety. In silence, the need to understand everything fades, replaced by a quiet assurance that understanding is not a prerequisite for trust. This humility opens the heart to peace that does not depend on circumstances. Silence is also where transformation begins invisibly. Nothing outward may change, yet inwardly everything shifts. Reactions soften, anxiety loosens, the spirit steadies, silence recalibrates the inner world, aligning thoughts, emotions, and desires. It becomes a sacred place where the heart is gently adjusted without force. As silence becomes habitual, awareness deepens. The presence of God is no longer confined to moments of prayer but carries into daily life. Ordinary moments become infused with meaning. The soul learns to remain attentive even while moving, working, and speaking. Silence leaves an imprint, teaching the heart how to listen even when sound returns. In this space, the heart discovers that God was never absent, only unheard. Silence does not create connection, it reveals the connection that already existed. It removes interference, allowing communion to unfold naturally. What begins as a practice becomes a posture, and what begins as stillness becomes a way of living. Surrender begins where self-effort ends. It is not a weakness, though it often feels like one at first. It is the quiet decision to stop resisting the flow of God's will and to release the burden of carrying outcomes that were never meant to be held. Most struggles are not born from hardship itself, but from the insistence on control. The soul learns early to protect itself by managing, planning, and holding tightly, yet this instinct slowly becomes a prison. True. Surrender is deliberate. It does not happen accidentally or emotionally. It happens intentionally, often in moments when strength feels insufficient. It is the act of placing personal desires, expectations, and timelines into God's hands without negotiation. This release exposes fear because control creates the illusion of safety. When control is laid down, the heart must confront trust directly. The resistance to surrender often reveals where attachment has formed. Attachment to outcomes, to recognition, to certainty, to comfort. These attachments quietly dictate reactions and decisions. Surrender loosens their grip. It allows the soul to breathe without the pressure of performance. As attachments dissolve, peace takes their place, not because circumstances improve, but because the heart is no longer striving against them. Surrender also reorders priorities. When personal will is no longer central, perspective shifts. What once felt urgent loses its dominance, and what truly matters rises naturally. The soul becomes less reactive and more responsive. Decisions are no longer driven by fear or impatience, but by quiet alignment. In this alignment, clarity replaces confusion. There is a sacred exchange that occurs in surrender. What is released is never lost, it is transformed. Anxiety gives way to assurance. Pressure gives way to peace. Exhaustion gives way to rest. God does not take without giving. He replaces the weight of self-management with the strength of trust. The heart learns that surrender does not diminish identity, it refines it. Surrender teaches dependence in the purest form, not dependence rooted in helplessness, but dependence rooted in relationship. It acknowledges that guidance is available, that wisdom is accessible, and that strength flows from a source beyond the self. This dependence does not weaken initiative, it stabilizes it. As surrender becomes habitual, inner resistance softens. The soul no longer fights uncertainty with tension, but meets it with openness. Life is approached with flexibility rather than force. Even challenges are met with a different posture, not as threats, but as invitations to trust deeper. In surrender, timing changes. Impatience fades because control has been released. Waiting becomes easier because faith replaces urgency. The heart rests in the understanding that what is guided cannot be rushed, and what is rushed cannot be guided. Surrender ultimately reveals freedom. Freedom from striving, from comparison, from the need to prove or protect. It creates space for grace to operate fully, unhindered by fear or pride. In that space, the soul discovers that control was never power, and release was never lost or gratitude. Begins as a choice before it becomes a feeling. It is not a response to ideal conditions, but a decision to recognize God's presence within imperfect ones. When circumstances are heavy, the heart naturally searches for relief, yet gratitude redirects attention away from what is lacking and toward what is sustaining. This shift does not deny pain, it reframes perspective. It allows the soul to acknowledge difficulty without being defined by it. Speaking gratitude aloud carries power. Words shape awareness. When gratitude is voiced, it moves from thought into action, anchoring the heart in truth. The mind begins to notice what had previously been overlooked: breath that continues, strength that endures, guidance that has quietly protected. Gratitude awakens memory, reminding the soul of past faithfulness and present provision. As gratitude is practiced, the heart softens. Hardness often forms through disappointment and unmet expectations. Gratitude loosens that hardness by introducing humility. It admits that life is sustained by grace rather than control. In this humility, the heart becomes receptive. What was once taken for granted becomes meaningful, and what felt ordinary becomes sacred. Gratitude also interrupts fear. Fear thrives on future uncertainty, while gratitude anchors the soul in the present. By acknowledging what is already held, the heart resists the pull of imagined outcomes. Peace grows not because the future is guaranteed, but because the present is recognized as supported. Gratitude stabilizes the inner world, even when the outer world remains unsettled. There is a refining effect in gratitude. Complaints lose their voice as appreciation gains strength. The mind becomes disciplined, trained to search for evidence of goodness rather than reasons for despair. This discipline reshapes emotional patterns, reducing reactivity and increasing awareness. Gratitude does not eliminate struggle, but it prevents struggle from becoming bitterness. Gratitude deepens intimacy with God. It recognizes Him not only as the answer to prayer, but as the constant companion through uncertainty. Thankfulness builds relationship, shifting prayer from request-centered to presence-centered. The heart no longer approaches God solely for change, but for communion. In that communion, trust deepens naturally. As gratitude becomes habitual, contentment grows. Desire no longer dominates attention. The soul learns to rest without needing more to feel complete. This contentment is not complacency, it is alignment. It allows growth without restlessness and ambition without anxiety. Gratitude also transforms vision. The way life is interpreted changes. Challenges are seen as shaping rather than punishing. Delays are understood as preparation rather than denial. The heart becomes patient, knowing that gratitude keeps it grounded regardless of outcome. In practicing gratitude, the soul discovers that joy is not something pursued, but something revealed. It emerges quietly when attention is properly placed. Gratitude does not wait for life to improve, it improves the way life is experienced. Through gratitude, the heart learns that God's presence is not found only in breakthroughs, but in every moment that sustains life. The mind is the gateway through which peace or turmoil enters the soul. Every thought carries direction, shaping emotions, decisions, and ultimately the course of life. When thoughts are left unchecked, they drift toward fear, doubt, and negativity, not because the mind is flawed, but because it absorbs whatever it is exposed to. Guarding the mind is not suppression, it is stewardship. It is the conscious responsibility to choose what is allowed to remain and what must be released. Thought discipline begins with awareness. Many thoughts operate unnoticed, quietly influencing reactions and beliefs. When awareness increases, patterns become visible. Repeated fears, recurring doubts, and habitual assumptions reveal themselves. This recognition is not meant to condemn, but to empower. What is seen can be addressed. What remains hidden continues to rule. Replacing destructive thoughts requires intention. When fear presents itself, it must be challenged with truth. When doubt whispers, it must be answered with faith. This exchange is not aggressive, it is steady. The mind learns through repetition. Each time a negative thought is interrupted, its authority weakens. Each time truth is reinforced, clarity strengthens. Over time, the inner dialogue shifts. Guarding the mind also involves boundaries. What is consumed through words, images, and conversations matters deeply. The mind reflects what it repeatedly encounters. Exposure to constant negativity shapes perception. Choosing uplifting, truthful, and life-giving input is an act of protection. It preserves clarity and prevents unnecessary inner conflict. As thought discipline develops, emotional stability follows. Reactions become less impulsive. Triggers lose their intensity. The mind no longer magnifies problems beyond proportion. Peace becomes accessible because chaos is no longer entertained internally. External circumstances may remain challenging, but the inner environment remains steady. The mind also influences spiritual sensitivity. When thoughts are scattered, discernment weakens. When thoughts are focused, awareness sharpens. Guarding the mind creates space for clarity, making it easier to recognize guidance, conviction, and direction. Mental discipline enhances spiritual attentiveness. Thought discipline requires patience. The mind does not change overnight. Old patterns resist change, returning repeatedly. Persistence matters more than perfection. Each effort to redirect thought reinforces new pathways. Gradually, what once required effort becomes natural. There is freedom in mental discipline. The mind is no longer a battleground, but a place of alignment. Fear no longer dominates imagination. Hope becomes more believable. Faith finds room to operate. The soul experiences relief as mental weight lifts. As the mind is guarded, identity stabilizes. Self-worth becomes rooted in truth rather than comparison. Confidence grows quietly, not from pride, but from clarity. Decisions become easier because confusion has less influence. Guarding the mind ultimately determines direction. Thoughts guide actions, actions shape habits, habits form character. When thoughts are aligned, life follows that alignment. The transformation begins invisibly, within the quiet discipline of choosing what the mind will dwell upon. Obedience often appears ordinary, yet it carries profound weight. It is rarely announced and seldom applauded, but it shapes the soul in ways nothing else can. Many wait for grand instructio. Believing transformation is tied to dramatic moments, while overlooking the quiet invitations presented daily. Obedience begins not with great sacrifice, but with attentiveness to small promptings that require humility rather than recognition. Small acts reveal true alignment. When obedience is convenient, it costs little. When it is subtle, unseen, and uncomfortable, it exposes the heart's priorities. Choosing kindness when irritation is justified, patience when pressure demands speed, and forgiveness when pride seeks defense are moments that refine character. These choices shape inner integrity long before they affect outward results. Obedience builds trust between the soul and God. Each act reinforces confidence in his guidance. As obedience is practiced, sensitivity increases. The heart learns to recognize direction more clearly because it responds consistently. Disobedience dulls awareness. Obedience sharpens it. The soul becomes responsive rather than resistant. There is a refining process in small obedience. Ego weakens, self-interest loosens, the need for control diminishes. Obedience shifts focus away from self-preservation toward alignment. It teaches the heart to value faithfulness over outcomes. This shift brings freedom because the burden of results is released. Small obedience also establishes discipline. It trains consistency rather than intensity. Growth becomes sustainable, not sporadic. The soul learns to walk steadily rather than relying on moments of inspiration. This steady walk produces depth rather than display. Obedience in hidden moments carries protection. Choices made privately shape reactions publicly. Integrity formed in solitude strengthens resilience under pressure. The soul becomes anchored, less vulnerable to compromise because its foundation is secure. As obedience continues, trust deepens. The heart no longer questions Eve. Instruction but responds with readiness. Confidence grows, not in self, but in God's wisdom. The fear of missing out fades, replaced by assurance that what is aligned cannot be withheld. Obedience also refines timing. Impatience weakens as trust strengthens. The soul learns that delay does not mean denial. Waiting becomes active rather than restless. Each obedient step prepares the heart for what follows. Through small obedience, transformation unfolds gradually. Change becomes internal before it becomes visible. Reactions soften, discernment sharpens, peace stabilizes, the soul matures quietly, strengthened by consistency rather than excitement. In the practice of obedience, the heart discovers that faithfulness carries its own reward. Alignment produces peace, trust produces rest. Obedience becomes less about effort and more about agreement. The soul learns to move in harmony rather than resistance, shaped by countless small choices that carry eternal weight. True change begins beneath the surface where alignment quietly replaces effort. Many pursue transformation by striving harder, doing more, and pushing beyond limits, believing that intensity produces results, yet effort alone often leads to exhaustion. Alignment, however, brings flow. When the soul is aligned with God, actions no longer feel forced, they feel guided. Energy is no longer drained by resistance, but sustained by purpose. Alignment starts with agreement. It is the inward decision to harmonize thoughts, desires, and intentions with God's will. When there is agreement, friction fades. Conflicting motives settle. The heart becomes unified rather than divided. This unity brings clarity because direction no longer competes with doubt. Effort focuses on control, while alignment focuses on cooperation. Control demands constant vigilance. Cooperation invites trust. When the soul stops pushing against what is meant to guide it, movement becomes smoother. Progress happens naturally, not because pressure is applied, but because resistance is removed. Alignment reshapes motivation. Actions are no longer driven by fear, comparison, or the need to prove worth. They arise from inner conviction. This shift stabilizes the soul. Motivation remains consistent because it is anchored internally rather than influenced externally. In alignment, rest becomes productive. The soul learns that rest is not inactivity, but renewal. Strength is restored without striving. Vision clears without urgency. Peace becomes a companion rather than a reward. This rest sustains long-term growth. Alignment also refines perception. The heart recognizes opportunities without chasing them. Discernment increases because attention is no longer scattered. Choices become simpler because alignment filters distractions. What does not fit naturally falls away. As alignment deepens, confidence grows quietly. There is less need for validation because direction is secure. The soul moves with assurance, even when the path is unfamiliar. This confidence is not loud, it is steady. It does not depend on immediate results. Alignment transforms reactions. Challenges are met with composure rather than panic. Delays are faced with patience rather than frustration. Trust replaces tension. The soul remains centered because its foundation is stable. Effort often measures success by visible outcomes. Alignment measures success by inner peace. When peace is present, progress is unfolding even if it is not immediately seen. The soul learns to value depth over speed. Through alignment, transformation becomes sustainable. Growth no longer relies on bursts of motivation, but flows from consistent agreement with God's direction. Life becomes less about striving upward and more about moving in harmony. In alignment, the soul discovers that true change does not require force. It requires surrender, awareness, and trust. When alignment is present, effort becomes purposeful rather than exhausting.